When I bought my first home, I thought it would be the beginning of peace, stability, and freedom. For years, I'd worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and saved every cent to finally have a place to call my own. Pulling up to that little suburban house with its neatly trimmed yard and white picket fence felt like stepping into the life I had always dreamed about. The neighborhood looked quiet, the lawns perfectly lined, the houses shining in the early morning sun. I told myself, this was it. This was where I'd finally build my peace. What I didn't know was that behind those pristine lawns lurked a nightmare. A homeowners association that was less about community and more about control, intimidation, and bullying. My first week in the neighborhood, I woke up to a sound that still makes my stomach twist whenever I remember it. Loud, insistent pounding at my door. It was 6 in the morning. My heart jumped, because who pounds on a door that early unless it's an emergency? I rushed out of bed, still in pajama pants and a wrinkled t-shirt, my eyes barely open, and opened the door. Standing in front of me were 3 people with clipboards. In the center was a woman in a bright red suit, her lips pulled tight into a scowl, her eyes sharp like knives. She was the HOA president, though at the time I had no idea who she was. She didn't even bother with a good morning. She looked me up and down, sneering as though my existence was an inconvenience, and then said coldly, "You're violating community standards. You're using the wrong garbage company." I blinked, trying to process. Wrong garbage company? I had moved in only 2 days earlier. The city pickup service had been serving this area for years. I mumbled something about just following city guidelines, but she cut me off with a sharp, dismissive tone. "That's not how we do things here. You'll need to switch immediately. We can fine you for non-compliance." Behind her, the 2 other board members scribbled notes on their clipboards as though I was a criminal caught red-handed. At that moment, I felt a surge of humiliation. I was standing there, half asleep, being treated like a misbehaving child by complete strangers who had stormed up to my door before sunrise. I thought maybe it was a one-time thing, some weird introduction to how things worked. But that was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. One afternoon, I found a bright orange notice stuck to my door, fining me for leaving my garbage can 2 feet too close to the curb. Another letter arrived accusing me of breaking rules because my porch light was on past midnight, something I hadn't even realized mattered to anyone but me. And then, just when I thought they couldn't possibly nitpick anything else, I received a warning about my mailbox. My brand new standard-issue black mailbox was apparently the wrong shade of black and disrupted the neighborhood as aesthetic. I couldn't believe it. At first I tried to shrug it off. I told myself maybe this was just part of living in a community with an HOA, that maybe things would calm down if I just complied. But the more I gave in, the more they seemed to take. The woman in the red suit, her name was Linda, though in my mind I came to call her the tyrant, seemed to have a personal mission to make my life miserable. Every time I saw her, strutting down the street with her clipboard, barking orders at other neighbors, I felt my chest tighten with anger. And every time I got another warning slip or fine, I felt smaller, more powerless, as if I had no control in the very home I had worked so hard to buy. But it was the 6 a.m. knock that broke me. The morning they woke me up just to tell me about garbage. That moment of being treated like a child in my own home was the spark that lit the fire inside me. I decided that if the HOA wanted a fight, I would give them one they would never forget. My revenge would not just be personal. It would be brutal, thorough, and final. I started by studying. If there's one thing people like Linda in the red suit rely on, it's fear and ignorance. They count on homeowners not knowing the rules, not understanding bylaws, and not daring to question authority. I spent long nights at my dining room table with stacks of documents. I combed through every line of the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I studied the bylaws, the financial requirements, and even state laws governing associations. I highlighted, bookmarked, and made notes. And what I discovered was shocking. This HOA wasn't following half of its own rules. The annual financial disclosures hadn't been filed properly in years. Fines were being issued without proper documentation, making many of them legally unenforceable. The board had failed to follow open meeting requirements, often making decisions in private and then pretending they had been voted on. But the crown jewel, the discovery that made me nearly laugh out loud in my living room, was that Linda herself, the red-suited tyrant who fined me for my mailbox, had built an illegal extension on her backyard patio. It was a clear violation of the very rules she enforced with ruthless glee. She had fined me hundreds of dollars for minor details, while she herself was in blatant violation of the HOA's own code. I knew right then. I had them. But I didn't rush. Revenge is best when served carefully. I spent weeks gathering evidence. I took photographs of the illegal extension, the missing records, the sloppy documentation of fines. I requested copies of board meeting minutes and highlighted every inconsistency. I quietly spoke with neighbors, many of whom whispered their own frustrations. One man told me he had been fined 3 times in a single month for leaving his car parked on the street overnight, even though the bylaws clearly allowed for temporary parking. Another neighbor had been forced to repaint her shutters twice because the approved color list mysteriously kept changing. These people were scared, beaten down, too intimidated to fight back. But when I told them I was building a case, they started sharing their stories. I became a quiet collector of grievances, each one fueling the fire inside me. The day of the open HOA meeting finally arrived. I remember walking into that room with my folder of evidence tucked under my arm, my heart pounding like a drum. The board sat at the front of the room, clipboards in hand, smug as ever. Linda was in her usual red suit, lips pressed tight in a permanent scowl. She looked at me with thinly veiled disdain, as if expecting me to be there to plead for mercy over some new violation. But I didn't plead. I stood, cleared my throat, and began to speak. At first, my voice was calm, almost conversational. I laid out the facts one by one. I showed them copies of their missing disclosures. I pointed out the improperly documented fines. I cited state law after state law that they had blatantly ignored. The room, which had started with quiet murmurs and shuffling, grew still. Neighbors leaned forward in their chairs. A few exchanged glances, eyes widening as they realized what I was saying. And then, finally, I pulled out the photographs of Linda's illegal patio extension. I placed them on the table in front of her, the evidence undeniable. The silence was deafening. Then a laugh broke out from one of my neighbors in the back. A bitter, relieved laugh, the kind that comes when injustice finally gets called out. Others joined in, some whispering, some nodding. Linda's face turned crimson to match her suit. She sputtered, trying to form words, but there was nothing she could say. She had been caught red-handed, exposed in front of the very people she had spent years bullying. In the end, the board had no choice. The fines were dismissed, not just for me, but for dozens of neighbors. Thousands of dollars were wiped clean overnight. State regulators were notified about the missing disclosures, and within weeks, Linda was forced to resign from her position as president. The woman who had strutted around the neighborhood with a clipboard and a scowl now couldn't even show her face on the street without whispers following her. Walking out of that meeting, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I truly owned my home. Neighbors who had barely spoken to me before came up to shake my hand, thanking me, calling me brave. Some even invited me over for coffee, eager to finally speak openly without fear of fines. The best part, though, was the look on Linda S.'s face, the pure humiliation of realizing she had been defeated by the very rules she once weaponized. That moment was priceless. Sometimes the people who crave control the most are the ones who deserve it the least. And sometimes, when they push too far, karma doesn't just knock on the door, it kicks it down at 6 a.m, loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. My revenge was brutal, yes, but it was also just. And in the end, it wasn't just about me. It was about standing up for everyone who had been too afraid to fight back, and reminding bullies like Linda that even in a perfect-looking neighborhood, justice always finds a way.